Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm so glad to see all of you. My name is Alex Rich. I am the new president and CEO of the Gibbes Museum of Art, and it's my pleasure to be here with you tonight. So tonight we kick off the 14th annual Distinguished Lecture Series. This is an exciting event, my first to attend, so I'm excited to be part of it. And the premise for the Distinguished Lecture Series was to imagine not just Charleston as a great center for the arts and for culture, but also to bring a forum to our community to celebrate distinguished speakers, distinguished art collectors, art historians, philanthropists, and more who can, again, underline the fact that this is a really wonderful city and I think undoubtedly, with all of us here, one of the great cities of the world. I say this also as a New Yorker and a recent transplant to Charleston, and even 4 months in, it is one of the great cities of the world. And so we deserve a lecture series like this. You know, I have realized even in my short time in this role and in Charleston that, not only is Charleston one of these great cities for the arts, but I think it's matched only by the vibrancy of its arts-loving community. So I applaud all of you for being here and supporting us tonight. And this is not possible without all of your support, of course. All of the costs of this and the cost of attending tonight go toward the operating costs of running a museum here in Charleston. So we're very, very grateful for that. Also, an event like this, 14 years in the making, would not be possible without the support of many, many in this room. So I'm going to ask you to forgive me for a second as I do the proper housekeeping here and celebrate those who have championed the Gibbes Museum and the arts in Charleston. Foremost among those is one Esther Ferguson. Esther Ferguson is with us this evening. Esther is not only a great doyen of the arts, but also a former board member of the Gibbes Museum, and she's the founder and ideator of this event. I just want to give you one quick anecdote. My first lunch, my first week here physically in Charleston was with Esther. I'd say we hit it off nicely, and I'm so grateful for everything you've done to bring this to the fore here in Charleston. So it's a tribute to you, and thank you, Esther. Thank you again. We're also grateful to all of our sponsors this year, without whose generosity this would not be possible. We thank our platinum sponsors, again, Esther Ferguson, the Kennard Kennedy Family Fund as well. Thank you, Deborah and Bill. Our gold sponsors, Samuel Freeman Charitable Trust. Thank you. Our silver sponsors, Martha Jones, Betsy Saul, and the Joseph J. Schott Foundation. There are a lot of names coming up, folks, so what I'm going to do is read the list, and let's applaud after the following. Our bronze sponsors, Louise Allen and Andrea Woodfield, Jill and Richard Almeida, the Fine Art Group, Graystar, Denise and Bernard Mansheim, the Post and Courier, Ms. Sally J. Smith, Liz and Chuck Sullivan, Tax Credit Marketplace LLC, and Karen Carlson. Thank you, bronze sponsors. Our education sponsors this evening, Marty and David Adams, Bill and Tater Beek, Miranda Brooks and Stephen Elliott Webb, Tejbir and Victoria Dinza, the Francis Marion Hotel, Milton and Joanne Hearn, Mindy and Jean Hong, Kathy and Buddy Jenrette, K and L Gates, the Kennard Kennedy Family Fund, again, Spencer Lynch and Lynch Capital Wealth Management of Raymond James, Chris Moss, CPA, Stephanie Pascarella, John M. Rivers Jr., Marilyn Schultz, and Walk and Talk Charleston. Thank you to our education sponsors. In order to pull off an event like tonight, this is usually a year in the making. So this is the culmination of a year of work, and we will begin this again, theoretically, tomorrow. We might take a few days off. But we also thank our Education and Programs Committee and our co-chairs, Tej Dinza and Stephanie Pascarella, as well as all of the members of what we call internally our EdPro Committee. Thank you all for your service in making this happen. And, there's a lot of undersung heroes on any team, but certainly at the Gibbes. We have a hard-working, intrepid team at the Gibbes, all of whom work day in and day out to bring amazing exhibitions and programs and events like this for our community. So I'd like to have a big round of applause to the entire team at the Gibbes Museum of Art, with whom I feel really honored to work every single day. And special kudos to our education and advancement teams. Also, I want to thank Angela Mack, my predecessor, my immediate predecessor, also for all of her years of hard work at the museum and her legacy in helping to bring this to fruition as well. Thank you, Angela. Okay, well, without further ado, let's get to the main part of our program. We have a really wonderful set of guests with us this evening, both a moderator and special guest. Our special guest traveled all the way from New Haven this evening. Before I introduce them and their bios, I do want to say this will be an interactive evening. Not right now, like don't shout things out right now, but at the end of the evening, we will take questions from the audience. So you will see already up here spinning through the slides, but also in your programs, you'll see a QR code. So you can scan that QR code at any time, and we will be collecting questions for which I will return to the stage and field to Dr. McInnis at the end of the program. So you can send those along as inspired throughout the evening, and you can also do that at the end of the program itself. So I invite you to do that. So first, though, tonight, I'd like to introduce our esteemed moderator. President Andrew T. Hsu became the 23rd president of the College of Charleston in May of 2019. Before joining the college, Hsu was the provost and executive vice president for academic affairs at the University of Toledo, the dean of engineering at San Jose State University, and the associate vice president for research and the dean of the graduate school at Wright State University. President Hsu earned his PhD in aerospace engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology in 1986. He then worked in industry for 11 years with Sverdrup, NASA, and Rolls-Royce, where he developed unique industry's perspectives and leadership skills before joining academia in 1997. Since his first year in office at the College of Charleston, President Hsu has overseen the addition of 3 new engineering programs: systems, electrical, and software engineering, the creation of the first doctoral programs in the school's history, the induction of the first cohort of Phi Beta Kappa scholars, record-breaking years of recruitment and philanthropic engagement, the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the college's founding in 1770, and the creation of a 10-year strategic plan. Let's all welcome President Hsu as our moderator this evening. Thank you for being with us, President Hsu. And now, finally, our very special guest this evening. Maurie McInnis is the 24th president of Yale University and a professor in the Department of the History of Art. She assumed her responsibilities as Yale's president on July 1st, 2024. A distinguished scholar, President McInnis has contributed significantly to her field as a cultural historian and is the author of 5 books, including In Pursuit of Refinement, Charlestonians Abroad, 1740 through 1860, and The Politics of Taste in Antebellum Charleston. Her academic career began at Yale, where she was a graduate student. She has spent 3 decades in higher education, holding a range of teaching, research, and leadership positions at several preeminent universities, including at the University of Texas at Austin and at the University of Virginia. Most recently, President McInnis was the 6th president of Stony Brook University, an internationally recognized public research institution and a flagship university in the state of New York. In addition to her academic and administrative roles, President McInnis has served on boards and commissions, including the Association of American Universities and Brookhaven National Laboratory. Let's all give a warm round of applause and welcome to President McInnis. Take it away.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, let me first say it's quite an honor for me to be sitting here with you. Before we ask you all the serious questions, you are obviously an exceptional person. Not just I mean it's not just because you're the president of Yale University, but you are a historian and historian in arts, and that's, I guess, very rare among university presidents. In fact, only barely 10% of university presidents have a doctorate in humanities or the fine arts. So, but do you still remember your PhD dissertation, or what's the title of your dissertation.
Yeah, so good evening and thank you. The honor is mine to be back in Charleston. I have a very long history with this city that, in addition to visiting family here when I was young, includes my dissertation being on Charleston. So I moved here in 1992 and lived here until 1995. And absolutely loved my time in the city. I was so warmly received by so many Charlestonians as they opened their homes to me, let me view and get to know their collections and the buildings of this amazing city. And so my dissertation, which I completed in 1996, was, the book is also related to it. It was called The Politics of Taste, Class and Classicism in Charleston. That later got expanded to the book that I published in 2005 that Rich mentioned, which was The Politics of Taste in Antebellum Charleston. So it's always wonderful to be back in Charleston.
So as an engineer, obviously, when I saw that title, I was thinking about culinary art, the taste. And do you have a favorite restaurant in Charleston?
Well, it is such a long list, but I'm going to mention a couple that no longer survive because it makes me so sad every time that I come back to the city that they are no longer here, but they were two places that really featured low country cuisine. One was Justine's, and the other is the Hominy Grill. So those were two of my, every time I was in town, I would make a beeline to both of them. But I'm going to name one more that has long been a staple of mine as well that I believe still does survive, or at least I hope it does. Last time I was here, it did. And that is, it's referred to as the Wreck of the Richard and Charlene. Like, that is where I go when I want great, simple seafood out in Mount Pleasant, and absolutely love that. But of course, there are many other amazing restaurants in town, and I have learned, for those of you who know New Haven, we're very into our pizza. You can get in political trouble if you say what your favorite is, so.
So obviously, a lot of the audience agree with you about your culinary taste. But you studied history and Southern history of the art here when you were in Charleston. Could you tell us a little bit about how that discipline has influenced your leadership style and how that's affecting what you're doing now?
Yeah. So I'm going to start first just by putting up Yale's motto, because we have a tendency to try to root everything in our motto. But I actually think it is useful for thinking about what is it about being an art historian that perhaps prepares you to be a university president. And there are no doubt times where we're going to be stretching some of this a little bit. But there is something about the power of the arts to help us see truths that may be right in front of our eyes, but we're perhaps blind to. There's an expression, of course, that the fish can't see the water. Many of us, we exist in the cultural milieus in which we exist, and I do think it is quite often artists who help us see the light, help us see truth. And so that is one of the ways in which I think about the ways in which being an art historian has helped me. And I would say that being a Southern historian has another way of having done that, because when I started working in Southern art history, it was relatively an understudied area. And in part because there was a certain orthodoxy that was alive and well in American art history. And it is this: Joseph Downs, curator at the Metropolitan Museum, very famous for having said, little of artistic merit, was made south of Baltimore. And everybody just went with that. And I found, when I was working on my PhD at Yale, a couple of objects that really forced me to question what was a received orthodoxy. So this sideboard, which came out of the Alston family, and like so many amazing things made in the American South, was purchased in a period of, considerable financial hardship in many Southern families. So purchased by a great collector in the 1930s from down here in Charleston, this remarkable sideboard, a sideboard that in any English context would have been like, yeah, it's an English sideboard, but is one of the very few American sideboards that has both this incredible Bombay front and this amazing pierced gallery at the top. And if you were to see it, the scale of it is just overwhelming. It was clearly made for one of the great Charleston townhomes owned by the Alston family. Really an extraordinary object. And also coming out of that family is this remarkable bookcase. And again, the scale of this thing dwarfs every other library bookcase that is in the Yale University Art Gallery furniture collection, which I can tell you is quite extensive. It's like 2 feet higher and 4 feet wider than any of them. And what this sort of, made me start wondering as a young graduate student is whether or not there wasn't a super important story that needed to be told here. I knew Charleston well from visiting family here, that it also was a city of extraordinary 18th and 19th century architecture. And so thought, maybe this is a place I need to come figure out, is there a great dissertation there to tell? And so back to the question you asked about, what about being a Southern art historian? I think it is this sense of wanting to both challenge orthodoxies and find hidden stories and making sure that we're not overlooking things that should be immediately obvious to us, but that are too easy to miss. And so things like that, but then also just knowing that there were extraordinary early artists in the South, such as this wonderful pastel by Henrietta Johnston, an early French Huguenot emigre to Charleston who's here in the very first decades of settlement here in South Carolina and producing remarkable works of art like this. So I knew there was a story there, and moving down to Charleston and living here for years, I probably could have written 10 books about this marvelous city.
So clearly that experience made you a better university president today. And as the president of the College of Charleston, I can't waste this opportunity not to ask you a question about the College of Charleston. So the 19th century miniaturist Charles Fraser actually is a College of Charleston alum, as well as a former trustee of the College of Charleston. So what makes Fraser's work stand out in American art history?
Charles Fraser is one of these remarkable Charlestonians from the 19th century who was, very much the embodiment of the Renaissance man. There are so many ways that he touched the cultural life of this city. And he had this clearly burning desire to be an artist. But he was in this city where there was no art academy, there were no professional ways to learn to become an artist. He affiliated himself with and learned from a lot of the major artists who passed through Charleston, and from them learned to be a great artist. He was most accomplished in the art of miniatures. And there are many at the Gibbes Museum that you can go see. This is one of his really just charming self-portraits of himself. But he also was a landscape artist, a still life artist. He has this amazing sketchbook where he went out into the Low Country and made beautiful watercolors and sketches of so many of the plantation homes in the area, the early churches of the area. You really can learn and meet most of the personalities in antebellum Charleston by studying Fraser's miniatures. And as I got very, very deep into the genealogies and the understanding of the many families who really defined 19th century Charleston, it was often to Charles Fraser's miniatures that I would go to sort of have that visual in my mind of the person that I was learning about. But in addition to being an artist, he was involved with the College of Charleston. He was a deeply civic involved individual, and he gave speeches all around town for a variety of different issues. He was important to the early years of the founding of the Gibbes, to the artistic community in Charleston, really, really touched the life of this city for such a long time. He passed away in 1860, and I think he was born in like the 1780s. So a long life and really an anchor in Charleston.
Yeah, he actually practiced law.
Yeah, he was a lawyer too.
Years,
but
so,
yeah, no, I mean,
College of Charleston graduates are multi-talented. So you talked about genealogy, and you're now talking to a large group of many of them, many generations of Charlestonians. What does the city of Charleston mean to you?
Yeah, so both my dissertation and the book, The Politics of Taste, are really what are my attempt in many ways to be a portraitist like Charles Fraser. They are urban histories of the city, really wanting to understand everything, both about the lived experience of being in Charleston. And for me, the best way to understand history has always been through art and the built environment. For me, that is how history came alive for me, how I could understand the past, how I could understand different cultures. While my scholarship is entirely based in kind of 18th and 19th century America, I've taught, cave paintings to modernity around the world, and art for me has always been the way to understanding a culture. So the city of Charleston is very much, for me, a bit of a character. It is somebody that I really wanted to understand well. And there were so many ways to go about doing that. I can't even count how many days studying archival sources in the South Carolina Historical Society, getting to know everything in the collection at the Gibbes, at the Charleston Museum, that were still in private homes. And the city comes together for me very much as a very complex, very unbelievably important city. I mean, Charleston was not only one of the largest cities, but by far one of the wealthiest cities in America, and politically very significant in the 19th century. This painting of Charleston is also in the Yale University Art Gallery's collection. I'm sure it is a place you all recognized well, right? It is the Battery in the 1830s by a traveling artist. And I have now the amazing good fortune, while this has been on loan to the Edmonston Alston House for a very long time, because that house is in the painting, I get to have in my office as the president of Yale its companion painting by the same artist showing Charleston from the harbor. And I think it's important for all of us to remember we live such land-based lives, but Charleston, of course, the peninsula, bound by the Ashley and Cooper River that meet to form the Atlantic Ocean, is a place that to many people would have been known much more as a port city. So I am not the only one intrigued with trying to understand this city. For centuries, artists have been trying to capture the city. So whether it's, Samuel Barnard in the 19th century or Anna Hayward Taylor here in the early 20th, many of us have been trying to understand this complex city of Charleston. But the city of Charleston for me, and Southern art for me, is another thing and another place where, especially working with my colleague Angela Mack over many decades of great fun working with Angela on a number of exhibitions, we also wanted to push the boundaries of what we even meant by Southern art, because it's not, for us, solely the things made here, but the way in which art shaped the lives of people who lived here. So in addition to artists like Charles Frazier from Charleston, worked his whole life in Charleston, Charleston was very much shaped by the artists who traveled through this city. Charleston was a very cosmopolitan city in the 19th century as American cities went. So you have remarkable portraits like this one at the Gibbes by a Northern artist, Thomas Sully, of a Southerner. This just really one of the most luscious portraits of the 19th century. Or you have the way in which artists who worked here in Charleston, like Henry Benbridge, but who went to Europe for their training and then brought back that culture. So this portrait here of Mrs. Charles Coatsworth Pinckney by Henry Benbridge in this unbelievably classicizing, Italianate manner, bringing in many ways Europe to Charleston, and many Charlestonians going on the grand tour, collecting art overseas. Also couldn't resist reminding Charlestonians of this linkage to Yale. One of the artists who for 3 years was the most popular portrait painter in Charleston was Samuel F.B. Morse. Most of us would know Morse as the inventor of the telegraph, but if you're at Yale, you know Morse because he went to Yale. He lived in New Haven, and we have a residential college named after Morse. But this portrait here also at the Gibbes by Samuel F.B. Morse. So many, many connections between Yale and Charleston. And other Charleston artists, John Izard Middleton here traveling to Europe and painting the sites that he saw there, bringing those back here as well. So this sense of Charleston, which I think in many people's minds was often seen when we started our work as kind of a small southern town, was actually this very cosmopolitan place, and we wanted to help people understand that. And in Charleston homes were remarkable art collections. This purchased by a member of the Middleton family, a painting by Angelica Kaufman of Simon and Iphigenia, just a great example of the kinds of remarkable collections that Charleston families put together. And it gives you a different sense when you're thinking about, well, what is Southern art and what was Charleston in the 19th century? It was a much more complex place than probably was in the imagination of many.
So you showed us a lot of Southern arts, and it makes me want to go to the Gibbes Museum tomorrow. So
absolutely.
Are there any particular works of Southern art that touched you or are the touch points for your leadership style? You talked a little bit about how that affects your leadership.
Yeah. So this was one of the hardest questions to think about a single work of art that would encapsulate sort of maybe the challenges of our jobs. And so I decided to go with this really simple covered cup that comes from, and so again, I'm pulling a little bit on our New England to Charleston connections. So circular congregational church. Yale was started as a congregationalist training grounds, right? In the early years, when you went to Yale, you did so to become a great congregational minister. So the congregational church, circular church here, sort of across the street from the Gibbes, this covered cup was made by a Charleston silversmith for that church. And what I really love about this is it seems incredibly simple. On its surface, placid, serene, looks like it must be one of the easiest things for a silversmith to make. In fact, it's actually one of the most difficult. Getting that kind of beautiful surface requires incredible, invisible skill by the silversmith. And I think in our jobs, they are very, very difficult, but we are expected to make them look quite easy and simple. So this spoke to me.
That really resonates with me, because I always think that if you can't manage a university on a card like this, then you're making things too complicated. President McInnis, you are not only a Southern art historian, but you're also an architectural historian. And Yale University, as one of the most iconic campuses, the building there reminds us of Harry Potter's school, Hogwarts, right? So how does that construct affect the environment of the university and your leadership of the university?
So Yale University is really fortunate to be home to many iconic buildings designed by some of the great architects in America over the last 300 years. And so I'm showing you a picture here of the space we call Cross Campus. In the center of this photograph is Sterling Memorial Library, often referred to as the Cathedral of Learning, given its sort of echoing of a Gothic church. And on either side are a residential college, Berkeley Residential College, also in the collegiate Gothic style. Much of Yale's campus is in the collegiate Gothic style, but we also have many important 20th century buildings, and we'll see one of those in a little bit. But the way that Yale has been designed was in many ways mimicking what was seen to be so special about Oxford and Cambridge universities, a campus that is built around the idea of connection. Undergraduate students live in residential colleges. Those residential colleges are meant to form small communities within the larger community of the university. They are meant to bring people together. Students eat in their dining halls, many of which look very much like the dining halls at Hogwarts in Harry Potter's. Just these great Gothic confections that are really gorgeous. And the whole notion of community is really at the heart of Yale University. And so it is not just the way in which students are brought together in community, it is the way that our campus, fully contiguous across all our disciplines, all right next door to each other, everything from our School of Medicine through Yale College out to our School of the Environment and our Divinity School, are all close and proximate. And the beauty of that is it allows us to be a university where lots of multidisciplinary initiatives are taking place and where everybody really feels that they are part of this really warm community meant to bring us all together. And the architecture is so key to our being able to do that.
So tonight's program obviously is presented by the Gibbes Museum, and we thank you for bringing these outstanding programs to Charleston. But Yale University is the home for some very great museums in the country, and one of them is called the Yale University Arts Gallery, or you call it UAG?
Yeah, our students, because everything has to have an acronym, it's the UAG.
UAG, okay. So I guess my question is, what role do you see the UAG playing in the wider conversation about art and museums, and what similarities do you see in terms of the relationship between UAG and New Haven and our own Gibbes Museum and the city of Charleston?
One of the things that I've always loved about art history, you know, I grew up mostly in Knoxville, Tennessee. I didn't get to travel much except to visit family in scattered places around North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida. And when I saw my first museum, which was the first time I went to New York City when I was 16, I was absolutely blown away. And that is really, I think, probably what started my love of art history, and what ultimately led to my being an art historian. As I said, it for me was the window onto the past and to different cultures. And one of the things I've always loved about being an art historian is that while, you know, yes, I can write books and maybe they're read by my colleagues in my discipline, I've also had the remarkable opportunity, most of them working with the Gibbes Museum and working with Angela Mack, to reach larger audiences. That is one of the things that I think art museums can do. It connects with a much larger public. It gives us this opportunity to both bring joy into people's lives, and that is a really important function of art, but it also has this opportunity to help people see truths that they might not otherwise see. And the Gibbes has been doing that for the city of Charleston since its founding as the Carolina Art Association in 1858. The UAG, or the Yale University Art Gallery, has been doing so for New Haven since really the 1830s. So back up for a little story about Yale's remarkable history. Many of you may know the painter John Trumbull. There is a remarkable portrait of George Washington that hangs in City Hall that was commissioned by the city of Charleston to commemorate George Washington's visit to the city of Charleston. Well, John Trumbull was a painter. His father had gone to Yale, and he quickly became associated with Yale. His cycle of paintings documenting the American Revolution, from the Battle of Bunker's Hill to Lord Cornwallis's surrender at Yorktown, as well as the Declaration of Independence. You probably know many of these paintings. They were all gifted to Yale University in the 1830s. And Trumbull so loved his paintings that he asked to be buried underneath his paintings. And so he is literally part of the foundation of the Yale University Art Gallery. On the screen, you see a photograph showing, you don't see the earlier building where Trumbull's paintings are located. It's had many additions. You see the 1923 Art Gallery, which is the kind of Romanesque revival building there in the foreground. And then on the end is the Louis Kahn edition, a remarkable Louis Kahn, one of the most important 20th century American architects. And Yale is fortunate enough to have his 1853 addition to the Yale University Art Gallery, and across the street, the Yale Center for British Art, his last building, designed in the 1970s, and it holds the Yale Center for British Art in the collection that Paul Mellon gifted to Yale.
I'm really happy that the College of Charleston has more solid foundations than Yale. So I would like to bring the conversation back to higher ed before we open it up for questions from the audience. I think it's an understatement that higher education is having a lot of challenges, and it's a very challenging time to be a university president. So what is your vision for the future of your own university, Yale University, and what's your vision for higher ed and the universities in general?
Yeah. You know, it must be the same thing you feel you have to figure out at this moment, because we are both presidents at institutions with very long histories. And that tradition is part of what makes them so special. And yet, it can also be a bit of a weight as we want to innovate, as we want to do new things. And Yale certainly has to struggle with this, and I'm sure you struggle with this as well. How do we both respect the tradition, understand what are the core values and principles of your institution that you want to protect no matter what, and yet find ways to innovate as well? And so I like to think of that as, you know, trying to figure out how do we find the balance between innovation and tradition. And I know that the College of Charleston has managed to do so with a lot of what it is doing, both in terms of new programs and new buildings that are part of the campus. It was something, obviously, that Yale has frequently had to think about. And as we renovate our older buildings or add on to our older buildings, how do you both be sympathetic to the earlier tradition and yet innovate? So Louis Kahn's addition to the Yale University Art Gallery, you know, to some people was like, whoa, what is this modernist thing? You know, and the Gibbes similarly has a modernist addition to the back of its glorious 1880s Beaux-Arts building. I think a lot of Southern artists have done this balancing of tradition and innovation well. At the Gibbes, I always love seeing Mary Jackson's work, her, you know, leaning so heavily on this very long tradition of sweetgrass basket making that really comes from West Africa to the South Carolina Lowcountry, and yet she's always innovating on this tradition in the same way that an artist like Radcliffe Bailey in this remarkable work called Charleston, that if you haven't been to the Gibbes to see it, you absolutely must go. He very often starts his work with a historic artifact. Quite often it's a photograph or a daguerreotype in the center, but here it is literally a piece of tabby from a Lowcountry building, in other words, a part of an architectural building, with its oyster, with its sand, with its limestone, and then the ways in which, in an abstract way, he is playing off of pattern and color. And so that combination of tradition and innovation, I think, is what we in higher ed need to continue to do. And, you know, it's a tricky balance for all of us leading universities with long histories.
I'm so happy to hear that, because this is certainly confirmation that the College of Charleston is doing the right thing. We have a 10-year strategic plan that we developed 5 years ago. The title is Tradition and Transformation. So exactly what you're saying. So thank you. With that, let's give Dr. McInnis a big round of applause.
That was terrific. I could listen to you both all day. This is great. So now it is time, folks, to open up for questions. You see this huge QR code on the screen. If you've not submitted a question yet, Please, we will not be insulted. Please pick up your phones and scan that QR code and submit some questions here, which I will field for our special guest. So I'll start with what I have, and these are going to actively appear magically on my screen as you send them in. So we'll see how this technology works. But hi,
Innovation at work.
Hi, Dr. McInnis.
Hello.
Oh, okay, well, I'm going to actually read this as is. My name is Danielle Drummond. I'm a senior studio art major at the College of Charleston with minors in art history and arts management, and I currently serve as the president of the National Pan-Hellenic Council. I'm really passionate about pursuing a career in marketing and advertising because I see it as an important step in the restoration of culture and communication in the modern age. My question is, what advice would you give to students in the arts who want to continue their education or enter creative industries that merge visual storytelling, strategy, and cultural impact? What a question, Danielle Drummond.
Yes, wow. Daniel, excellent. Not only that, I think Daniel's kind of figured it all out. I'm not sure there's much there for me to answer. What we are all seeing in our students today are students like Daniel who understand the interconnectedness of things that we in the academy often treat as separate disciplines. We mostly are living by the way in which universities were sort of formalized in 19th century Germany. And we still have all those disciplines and we divide ourselves up by those programs, but our students see the connections between the many different places. And I can imagine that Daniel is going to find his way well. But it is this world of, take advantage of every person you meet. Make sure that you remember that you never know when that person may be the person who gives you the great introduction to somebody else, who gives you great advice for where you go next. And in this complicated world, it is harder to make your way in the arts than in many other fields. And it's just perseverance and making as many connections as you can, and taking some leaps and taking some chances. So, you might get the crazy opportunity to leave Lakeland, Florida and come to Charleston, even though you've never been there before. And sometimes you want to make those leaps. So I often have the soundtrack of Wicked in my head because I think it's a good one to keep in mind. Just take a chance and leap.
So, Dr. McInnis, as you're giving students the advice, certainly the well-rounded liberal arts education is one that's very important. But I wonder if, from your angle, what does technology and modern technology such as AI and large data and so forth, what does that play in a student's success, such as Daniel's?
Yeah, this is one of the most rapid, disruptive technologies in any of our professional lives that we've ever seen. And I think we're all struggling to figure out the ways in which we ensure that two things simultaneously are happening. One is that real learning continues to take place and making sure that we can construct educational environments where that is the case, while we are simultaneously making sure that our students become completely trained in these new technologies, because no matter almost anything they go to do after they leave college, we need them to be equipped to know how to use these tools, to be a leg up on the older people who don't know how to use these tools, that are going to make them ready for their lives and careers. And so it's a real challenge because there are ways in which AI can disrupt your learning and ways in which it actually needs to be fundamental to your learning. And so figuring that out, I know, is challenging us and all of our faculty, and would love to hear what you have to say on this as well.
Indeed, that's what our campus is trying to figure out. In fact, we have made AI, or in the incorporation of AI, inside and outside of the classroom, one of our major projects for the next 10 years.
I'm glad to have left academia behind 4 months ago. You know, AI was becoming very complicated in the classroom, but it's a fascinating conversation, and to see how it develop will be equally fascinating. Another question for Dr. McInnis: how did your time at UVA and the architecture there impact your study of the South? What role did your time there play in your career?
So I went to the University of Virginia as an undergraduate student, and then I did my PhD at Yale. And after finishing my PhD at Yale, I had what I thought was the jackpot lottery job to become a faculty member at the University of Virginia. I had had an amazing undergraduate experience there, and it was really extraordinary to be back on the faculty there. For those of you who don't know the University of Virginia, the original core part of the campus was designed by Thomas Jefferson in the later years of his life. He lived at Monticello, a few years away, designed the University of Virginia as what he referred to as the project of his old age, and it is a remarkable collection. And at the time, the largest collection in America of extraordinary classical buildings designed en suite. So the rotunda at the head, modeled after the Pantheon at Rome, marching down around an open quad, 5 buildings on each side that were 2-story residences for the faculty, and smaller 1-story, what were referred to as lawn rooms in between, student dormitories in between. He was designing, in many ways, the first residential college in America that Yale then later copied in the 1930s when it created its residential college system. A beautiful collection of buildings modeled after Palladio, and then real Greek and Roman examples, and one really kind of modern neoclassical building inspired by the French architect Ledoux. So gorgeous campus, absolutely loved my time there. And classicism being the predominant architectural style throughout the American South in the 19th century is something that much of my scholarship has been focused on, whether it's Charleston, UVA, or other things. My time there was extraordinary. I loved my time in the classroom, and it was at UVA that I did my first leap when I was given a leadership opportunity there to, run a department. And what I learned through that was the joy I had found in the classroom of unlocking the potential of individual students was then expanded to this higher level. You could help set strategy for the department. You were unlocking the potential of your fellow faculty members as well as all of the students. And at UVA, I got a number of just sort of larger and larger leadership opportunities, which were really extraordinary. So UVA, I'm an alum. Wahoo wah, if there are any who's in the audience, also holds a special place in my heart.
Well, keeping in line with this architecture conversation, it's a really good segue to our next question that has come in. Innovation and tradition. Charleston has a tension between traditional and contemporary architecture and is also a home of major new urbanism neighborhoods. R.I.P. Vincent Scully. What would you advise to those who are building and supervising in town today? Is scale more important than style? Are there lessons from older cities like New Haven and Charleston that we should keep in mind today?
Yeah, wow. For those of you who are native Charlestonians, I can only imagine the transformation that you have seen, because just in my own time of really knowing the city well from the early 90s, there are parts of the city that I go to that I feel like I don't recognize at all. Like, it's really extraordinary how much growth has happened here. And, Charleston is in many ways the birthplace of historic preservation. First, it was the Preservation Society, and then it was the Historic Charleston Foundation. And this was happening as some really important buildings in Charleston were being threatened with being torn down. And so that's been a tension here in the city for the last century, and I know that it will continue to be. And it's a real struggle because you can't save every old building in a city like Charleston, because there are a lot of them. And yet, even though one individual building may not be important, if you lose 3 or 4 of them in a row, then you're starting to erode the character of a neighborhood. And it's an enormously complicated challenge. And, I can imagine that colleagues here who are working in historic preservation are juggling this all the time. I do think there are ways that you can integrate modern architecture with older buildings. It takes really talented architects to be sensitive to scale, as you mentioned, to material, to the neighborhood in which it exists, to make these harmonize. And yet it is necessary sometimes to move forward. And so to all the city planners and to all the historic preservationists, I can imagine that with every passing year, it gets more and more challenging.
So, Dr. McInnis, this is a very real question and issue for us. Obviously, we're in the process of trying to demolish some buildings, and we were just recently given a large gift of a major building in the city at a major intersection, future entrance to Union Pier development that we plan to tear down. So I guess I would like to ask your opinion as to at what point a building becomes a historic, a building of historic importance. Is age, it's style, it's all of the above?
It's age, it's style, it's what happened there, it's who lived there, it's how much of the context still survives for the building. Is it a truly, there are so many 18th and 19th century buildings in this city. Some of them are more architecturally significant than others. And so sometimes you have to, we had this problem at UVA as well. And we created grades of our buildings and had to make choices between those that needed to be preserved, like the Jeffersonian buildings, like don't touch a brick, right? But some of the others, it was you preserve the character, but you can still modernize it. And so it's a tough series of things, but you want to be able to create for yourself a series of criteria. You want to do it in absence of what are we doing with this building? What are the principles that we are going to use about every historic building that may pass through our hands that we're going to have to make decisions about? And sometimes if you can be more removed from an individual decision, create your principles, and then apply those, it makes it a little bit easier and a little less emotional with each choice.
We can certainly use your help.
Well, on the College of Charleston front, the students are very impressive, coming out tonight with really wonderful questions. So bravo to College of Charleston students. The next up is, hi, Dr. McInnis. My name is Ella Moore. Should we have Ella raise your hand? Ella, wave your hands so we can see where you are here. I heard you talk about the built environment and art as mechanisms for understanding history. As a public health major at the College of Charleston, I would love to hear your opinions on art as an indicator of culture and community health. Can you speak about how you see art impacting community health throughout your lived experiences, such as living in Charleston or working at Yale University? And then there's one more final part of this, also a fun question. This is fun. This is already a fun question, but another fun question. What does your personal art collection look like? For a full left turn.
Yeah, well, I don't have the budget to have the art collection I'd like to have, but I mostly collect prints, because that's what I can afford, of a number of African-American artists working mostly from sort of 1930. Actually, the most recent I have is a Radcliffe Bailey, who I showed one of his monumental works that you have. So that's what little bit, I'm not sure I'd call it a collection, but that's what I like to buy when I can. So, there is a whole new movement in public health that is connected both with urban planning and with architecture. our buildings and our communities have so much to do with public health. And so to Ella, wherever you are, I would encourage you, if you are interested in this, to really begin to learn more and think about that. There are ways that we design our cities in America that have been horrific for our public health, whether it is, neighborhoods that are close to industrial sites. Like, that's the obvious thing, but it is more in the ways in which we interact or don't interact with our environment, the role that nature plays in our cityscapes, the role that tree cover plays in helping to keep our cities from being too hot. Like, there's for those of you who are interested in sort of environmental issues, there's this really terrifying book, The Heat Will Kill You First, and the ways in which our cities are getting hotter and hotter as we make them more concrete, as we don't have trees, as our planet is warming, as the pathogens move farther north, like the mosquitoes that we know are a problem here are moving up into northern regions. So there's so much about public health and architecture and urban planning that are interconnected and very important. And if you've lived in Charleston in the summer, you have an understanding of how important that sort of design is for your comfort down here.
Okay, very good. We're going to take two last questions here, in fact. The next one is fun, different angle on your life and career and your love of art. Have you ever tried your hand at painting or sculpture or some other artistic endeavor?
So first of all, I have zero talent, which is true, I think, of many art historians. We love art. We're not always great artists. But I will say, like many during COVID, I needed something to do other than just stress about the university and health system that I was running at the time. And so, did one of those online watercolor classes because I think one of the things that first attracted me to art was color. And so I mentioned the first museum visit I made when I was 16, but also in that same year, it was the first trip I made outside of the country, and I got to go to Europe with my parents, and it was their first trip out of the country as well. And the stained glass windows in Gothic cathedrals just fascinated me. And so both glass and watercolor, I just think, are some of the places where you get that luminosity of color that, for whatever reason, visually has always appealed to me. So I've made a lot of really, really bad abstract watercolors, but I still do it sometimes as, meditative time.
You've not taken up stained glass
I have not,
yet.
but when I'm not, it's on my list. But it's, I think, a post-presidential hobby.
We hope that's a long, long time from now. The final question of the evening is one that is forward-looking. So, President McInnis, do you have any advice to any College of Charleston students who are graduating this December, going off into the world?
Yeah. Yes. First of all, don't despair. The headlines are going to be out there scaring you because that's what headlines like to do. And there is no doubt that AI is disrupting so many jobs that used to be expected entry-level jobs. That said, be patient, persevere, work your networks, ask for an introduction and an introduction from introduction, reach out to your alumni who I am sure are happy to make introductions and give you advice. And it is remarkable what patience, perseverance, and networking will do. And be willing to take some of those chances and jump in and do something that maybe wasn't exactly what you thought you wanted to do, but it's a start and it opens doors, and from that, more doors open. What do you tell your students?
What you just said.
Well, Thank you so, so much. Our moderator for the evening, President Hsu, thank you. And of course, our guest of honor, President McInnis, thank you so much for being here. What a wonderful evening. Again, thank you all so much for being here tonight. We hope to see you at next year's Distinguished Lecture Series, but come and be involved in the Gibbes every day you're able. Thank you all so much. Have a good evening. See you soon.